But our first speaker is Jim Tuller. And Jim traces his life journey. His parents became Jehovah's Witnesses while he was a young child. Well, actually, I probably don't need to tell you all that because he's going to share it with you. But I will say, Jim lives in Coon Rapids with his wife, Sue. His wife of 24 years. They have 3 children and 1 grandchild. He is a production manager at Precision Associates. His education includes an AS in business management, North Hennepin Community College 2001, and a BA in business management from Bethel University in 2008. And Jim attends North Point Church in Coon Rapids. So I will shut up and turn it over now to Jim. Come on up, Jim.
Well, good morning, everybody. When Steve first approached me about presenting, I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. But I came to the realization I did have a story to tell. And I thought maybe some people would like to know what it's like being a Jehovah's Witnesses, or one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and what it's like leading them, and being an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and what it's like eventually coming to Christ. I can describe my search.
Jim, can I interrupt you for 1 second? I just forgot to mention, over there, help yourself to coffee and snacks. And if you need restrooms, they're right out in the hall and to the left. And that's it, sorry.
That's okay. I'll need a snack after this. I can describe my search for truth in life as a 3-part redemption story. I grew up a Jehovah's Witness, and I was judgmental, arrogant, know-it-all. I believed what I was taught, and I trusted it was true. And after I left them, I was a skeptical naysayer. I trusted my wisdom, my reason. In other words, I trusted me. And after I accepted Christ, I trusted Him and His truth in His life. But how did it all begin? Well, when I was just an infant, my mother got hooked. Somehow, she got involved with a study with some lady, and that was in the early 60s. And for quite a few years, my dad resisted. He did not like that at all. In fact, he even had his sister try to talk her out of going to meetings and studying. He described his sister as a born-again Baptist. I chuckle about that now because I was once one of those not too long ago. But that failed. So he decided to move us, my brother and I, my younger brother, and we moved out to California for a few months. That was in 1968. But for whatever reason, the separation didn't work from the JWs, and he moved us back here to the Twin Cities. And at that point, I'm not sure what happened, what transpired, but he changed, and he joined my mother, and we were all in and becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. We started attending the Golden Valley congregation. I don't know if anybody knows Golden Valley, but there's what used to be a Kingdom Hall out by Honeywell over there. And each Kingdom Hall has about 100 members, so a group about this size, maybe just a bit larger. And it's area-based. You could only go to a certain Kingdom Hall based on where you lived. You were not allowed to be mobile, go across towns. You had, wherever you lived, you had to go what was assigned to you. I would describe the Jehovah's Witnesses as a highly organized cult that uses its publishing company, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, to spread its theology. And its members often refer to themselves and the society collectively as the organization. Meetings were all week long, and either we were going to the meetings or we were prepping for the meetings. That was their way, the society's way, of getting us and keeping us in line with their theology, their truth. They use that word truth, and I'll use the air quotes, to describe their doctrine, their theology. On Tuesdays, we'd have smaller groups in the homes, 10, 12 people, and it would revolve around some study of a book that they published, probably a major or minor prophet. They loved their prophecy. They can interpret it any way they want. But they chose that topic and how much you covered every Tuesday. It's a tight rein on what was taught. Then on Friday we had 2 hours at the Kingdom Hall. We had first hour consisted of a bunch of talks. Usually one that was about 15-20 minutes, and then some smaller talks. I got to do that a couple times a year. And again, the topics were pre-chosen by the society. You were told what to talk about. You weren't allowed to sway or to stray anywhere from their theology. The second hour is what they called a theocratic school. For lack of better description, it was their way of teaching you how to convert people. And on Saturday, as everybody here I'm sure knows, that was a door-to-door day. We went door-to-door every Saturday morning. They wanted you to do 10 hours a month door-to-door. If there were 5 Saturdays a month, you lucked out. If there were 4, there's an extra half hour every Saturday. You got to do that. Even the small children had to go. We went 2 by 2, teenagers and adults. I had my short hair, my ill-fitting suit. We had territory cards. They'd actually cut out a piece of a paper map, and they would assign that to people so that you would blanket that territory, just like a sales organization. That way they could ensure that every house in their territory was at least the door knocked on twice a year. We had to sell a certain amount of their publications, primarily the Watchtower and Awake, and back then they were published twice a month. Books, if you sold one of their books, that was a bonus. They loved it when you sold a book. You had to buy the literature from the Kingdom Hall. So you were out some money up in the upfront, so you had to sell just to recover your loss. But then at the end of the month, you fill out a report card. How many hours you spent, how many magazines you sold, how many books you sold. You also tracked back calls. Now, back calls are ones, if you sold a magazine, you'd go back 2, 3, 4 weeks later and try to sell some more. Fun fact, have you ever seen Jehovah's Witnesses out in the neighborhood? They always drive a 4-door car or a minivan, never a 2-door car. I remember growing up, there was a big judgmental attitude if a witness had a 2-door car. You were unchristian. If you got lucky, you got to start a Bible study. Well, it's really a JW book study, but nonetheless. And interesting about the Bible and the JWs, they have their own version, the New World Translation. It's been liberally translated, and sometimes errantly, just to conform to their theology. For instance, just as Steve read John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Their translation changes that last portion, and the Word was a God, small g. They do not believe in the Trinity. Jesus was not God. At one point, I actually led a book study with a teenager. That lasted 3, 4, 5 months, trying to convert him into becoming a Jehovah's Witness. Well, then Sunday came. We already spent a full week meetings and prep, but Sunday was the one that was geared a little more towards visitors. The first talk lasted back then an hour. I would call like your typical Sunday sermon. Again, topic pre-chosen. There was no Sunday school, though, for kids. If you had a kid, too bad. Put on our Sunday best. Even toddlers, no nursery. They had to sit with you for 2 hours. That second hour was the Watchtower. And the Watchtower had, it's in paragraph form, numbered paragraphs, with questions at the bottom. And every week I went through and I underlined all the answers because I was expected to answer at least one question every Sunday. And I was really lucky, since I was a male, I got to do microphone duty. Believe it or not, they would have wireless mics on bamboo sticks that we'd shove in people's faces when they wanted to answer a question. You felt really privileged if you got that. The songs, we had some great music just a few minutes ago. Their songs, for lack of better description, they felt to me like funeral dirges. It was not worship at all. They'd have one song at the beginning of the meetings, one in between the 2 hours, and one at the end. And if the week-to-week stuff wasn't enough, the society put together assemblies. The circuit assembly, they had two, one in the spring and one in the fall. That was a 2-day thing, about Saturday and Sunday. It was about 1,000, 2,000 people. That's the number of congregations put into one venue. The second, or the district assembly during the summer, it was a larger venue. They would have more circuits put together, anywhere from 10, 20, 30,000. And that was a 4-day event, Thursday through Sunday. Again, multiple speeches all around a single theme, pre-chosen topics. It was like a sales conference. One highlight, though, was, I was a kid, it was the biblical play. They'd have a play on Sunday. People in costume, that was kind of neat. And the other was they would release usually 2 books every summer. I would call that their new light from Jehovah God, courtesy of the society. So either I was studying at the meetings, assemblies, or going door to door. That was my life, week after week, month after month. No family life per se, just my entire youth. I was on my way, I thought, to be a perfect Jehovah's Witness. I was taught over and over, and I actually believed it. I felt superior because I had the truth. But I always felt I was one step away from Jehovah God rejecting me. There was a lot to live up to in the organization. On the personal side, I never got an attaboy, though. Not for what I knew or did. Not even for my high grades in high school. Not even for being me. So I was conflicted. I felt superior to those outside the organization, but not good enough to be accepted by Jehovah God or by my family. And when these feelings started to rise, I realized something was wrong. But what? Well, maybe I could be a better GW. And how would I do that? Well, Cindy would recognize this. But this little blue book, The Truth That Leads to Eternal Life. This was their guidebook of the 70s. This had all the doctrine and stuff that they wanted you to follow. That was our guidebook. It said things like, we're not to be of this world. Don't be worldly. In fact, we should avoid worldlies, as they are evil and bad influences. True Christians didn't involve themselves in wrong activities. I had no birthdays. I was taught birthdays exalted people above Jehovah God. I had no Christmas. The society stated it had a pagan origin and should therefore be avoided. I had no Easter. The society stated that Jesus never commanded us to celebrate his resurrection. They just had a memorial service for Christ's death. The elements would pass by, and only the remnant, the remaining ones of the 144,000 yet to go to heaven, would partake. That's the 144,000 referenced in Revelation that they interpreted obviously incorrectly. But how did you get to be one of those 144,000? Well, you would feel it, or you'd be called. There's really no set way. Someone like me, I'd have to hope that I was worthy enough to be a Jehovah's Witness and live on earth, in paradise earth, because everyone else at Armageddon would be annihilated into non-existence. They didn't believe in hell. In school, I couldn't do the Pledge of Allegiance, couldn't salute the flag. I couldn't even celebrate the 4th of July. These things exalted a government of man over Jesus' kingdom. I couldn't even consider post-high school education, especially college. It was a bad influence. It would steer me away from Jehovah. Focus should be becoming a pioneer, it's like full-time door-to-door, or a ministerial servant, what I would call like an elder light, just, to serve Jehovah and the organization. As an adult, I wouldn't be able to vote. I wouldn't be able to consider military. Rather, we were to be pacifists. Our family, my family, was supposed to be a model of perfection. We had to be good enough in Jehovah God's eyes to survive Armageddon. He was all-seeing and ready to punish if we did anything on the long lists of don'ts. If found worthy enough, I would live forever on a paradise earth, not heaven, as I was not one of the 144,000, because I didn't feel it and I didn't think I was called. The society said they had to earn grace, or what they called undeserved kindness. Kind of an oxymoron. But how to earn this? How do we earn that? How do we be worthy? Well, one time in my youth, I was tested as what I would call a significant moment for me. It sticks in my memory. And after years of being taught and told how to be that perfect Jehovah's Witness via their literature and all the meetings, I came to my dad with a real problem. You see, I was being bullied a lot from some neighborhood kids. And I was taught by the org to turn the other cheek. But my dad told me to stand up for myself. And he was a full-blown JW. And to me, that was a big incongruence. I had opposing directives. And ultimately, my dad, he left me hanging as I was given no clear direction, no suggestion, no tip on what to do. I felt dismissed, almost as if he didn't care. Following the direction from the society meant you could be a good Jehovah's Witness. And with that direction came Bible interpretation. And that could only come from the society. So strictly reading the Bible without the aid of a society-published book was not allowed. They would explain everything. They wanted no mystery. They wanted you to believe their mantra 100%. The society had the gall to claim that they were the faithful and discreet slave mentioned in Jesus' parable. They, through the organization, prey on people looking for answers using a lot of human reasoning, partial truths, singular scriptures out of context, compounded assumptions, obscure authorities, all to bolster their positions. A lot of assumptions followed by if-then statements or little leaps of logic. You agree anywhere on that line of logic and you get roped in. I call it the Perry Mason effect. Isn't it true that? And they keep taking these little micro steps and you get sucked in before you know it. It all seems so logical. It had an appearance of truth, but only was meant to please the organization. And without critical thinking, one can be tempted to accept their logic. I thought I really knew the Bible, but unbeknownst to me, I was only versed in isolated, out-of-context scriptures that the society fed me to prop up its theology. But I was sold. I was better than the worldlies, judging them to be destroyed in Armageddon. Well, as I was growing up in the 70s, my two sisters were born. So along with my brother, who was a couple years younger, my family was now the picture-perfect JW family. Well, the problem was I saw my life as always the truth, but nothing really to do with family. We did so little together outside the organization. It was pathetic. We had no contact with relatives because they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. We had one exception, my grandparents. I don't know why that exception was made. All I can assume it was my dad's call. But outside that, we had little social life outside the organization. I was miserable. And furthermore, when I was later in my teens, I was seemingly being groomed to be a ministerial servant. But then I started doubting all this stuff, especially the society and the org as a whole. In high school, I worked hard to get my good grades. As I mentioned earlier, never an attaboy. And in the organization, I did all the work that you should do as a JW. I never got an attaboy for that either. I received no acknowledgement for anything, and I just wanted some recognition. I wasn't accepted, I was ignored, and that feeling was terrible to endure. Moreover, as a Jehovah's Witness with this doctrinal baggage, I hated how I was viewed by others. And I was the oddball. I didn't fit in. And I wasn't even sure if I believed it anymore. So I was really isolated, different from others, disillusioned behind a facade, and I needed an outlet where I could be me. So what do you do when you're a mid-teen? You get a job. So I did. I worked as an orderly in a nursing home. And I helped people, and I really liked that. And I liked it enough that at one point I mentioned to my parents that, what if I became a doctor? I thought the world was coming to an end. My dad became just furious. I should be a pioneer for the organization, for Jehovah God, and not waste my time going to school in these last days. Rejected again. That's when I saw I had no future in that organization, or even my family. I was rejected by the world for being a JW, and I no longer believed it. I was rejected by my parents for not wanting me. I wanted a different family, a different truth, a different life. I was angry at my parents and Jehovah God, and I wanted to get out. But what was I to do? If I revealed what I thought, if I revealed me, I'd be thrown out and shunned. I felt pressured to get baptized, and that pressure was increasing. Being baptized in an organization carried with it significant consequences. For me, I'd still be accepted by my parents, however shallow that felt, and I'd have a place to live. Not getting baptized and telling my parents my true thoughts and feelings, well, I risked getting kicked to the curb. Again, getting baptized meant assuming I had left the organization at some point, I would be an apostate and would be shunned, and I would lose anything and everything I grew up with. My family, JW friends, essentially my life. Well, I decided to get baptized. To the JWs, this signifies allegiance to the organization. I didn't subscribe to that. I just did it to survive my couple remaining years in high school. Funny, but not really, that was the only time my dad ever congratulated me. I lived as a poser those last couple of years in high school. I didn't want to stay. I was questioning everything, my view of the org, my view of my family. Everything was crumbling. Everything was intertwined. I really didn't know what I wanted, but I know what I didn't want. And in an odd way, I don't think I actually questioned God. I think I knew there was a God, but I didn't take that any further. I just didn't want to be told what to do, what to think. I had enough of that. For me, I figured, well, I can balance a checkbook. I can heat soup. I can change a flat. I figured I could make it on my own. But what I didn't realize is I was not equipped emotionally to make it. Well, in 1979, after I graduated high school, after 3 months, I moved out. I moved to St. Louis Park, close to where I was working. And I stopped all JW activity. I was in a different territory, a different congregation. So initially, my parents didn't even know I stopped going to meetings. So I became what's referred to as inactive. It wasn't official. I didn't tell anybody. I just did it on my own. And my parents assumed I was going to the St. Louis Park congregation. Well, one evening I went to my parents' house for dinner, and I began to get subjected to a lot of questions about the St. Louis Park congregation and the people there. I was getting hammered and hemmed and hawed. I was hemmed and hawed. I couldn't figure out how to answer all this stuff because I never went. So at one point, our emotions escalated. My dad got furious, so did I. I just blew up and I stormed out. And at that point, well, the cat was out of the bag. Being inactive is now official. And as the months passed, I really became more certain of my disdain for the organization, and I wrote a letter of disassociation and gave it to my dad. It was announced at a meeting at some point in the Kingdom Hall where they went that I am no longer a Jehovah's Witness. I was disfellowshipped. I was now to be shunned as a way to shame me into coming back. But I was past the point of no return. There was no turning back. And now I was without the org, my family, my friends. Contact, even meals, was forbidden. I started wandering aimlessly for the next 13 years. Well, I was now an ex-JW on my own. I didn't care about anything. Family, God, anything. I was going to do things my way, no matter what anyone thought. I was already judgmental, but now I developed a foul mouth that would make a sailor blush. I was narcissistic, bordering on existentialism, humanism. I pushed God out of my mind. I could care less about him, and he could care less about me. In my pain, I cursed him. I blasphemed him. I felt like he, like my family, tossed me out like yesterday's garbage. In some respects, the shunning didn't bother me. I got to grow my hair nice and long. I got married. I got to vote. I got to celebrate a birthday for the first time, all the party and the gifts. I got to have that first Christmas season, gift giving and receiving. I developed some relationships with aunts and uncles and cousins I never got a chance to do before. But all of this was to no avail. That pain of rejection was really deep. At one point I attempted suicide. I found out much later that that's not all uncommon for those leaving the organization. We had a daughter, but all this was just too much for our marriage to survive, and we ended up divorced. So now I was alone, a single dad with no direction and no hope, a life full of despair. I mean, I was a devoted dad to my daughter, but I really didn't know how to show love. I really didn't know how to love myself. A few years later, my dad doubled down on the shaming, or the shunning, I should say, by trying to shame me. At his dad's funeral, he was in what I would call a small reception line. And as I approached him to shake his hand, he stood with his hands in front of him, stared into space, and would not extend his hand or even acknowledge I was standing 1 foot in front of him. That hit me hard. Did I want to believe in at that point in a heavenly Father or accept such? Not if he was like my earthly dad, not at all. So I started doubling down on my avoiding thinking about life and truth by burying myself in all sorts of stuff. Gaming, hunting, target shooting, playing the ponies, lots of music, movies, I mean anything I could to not think about life. I became engaged again, but she knew it wouldn't work out, so she broke it off. My depression just kept going on. But I didn't know anything else, so it's almost normal for me. My truth was a deception just as much as the Jehovah's Witness organization was a deception. I refused to acknowledge or even think about God. I was almost Star Trek-like. You know, man can control his own destiny and can rise above anything. I mean, I believed in myself, my intellect, my ability to survive, but I was really messed up. My depression was getting deeper, and I wasn't rising up at all. And after about 10 years or so, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to meet with my folks one more time. You could say I was trying to find myself. Well, they did agree to see me, surprisingly. Lasted about an hour. They showed me some pictures, usually pictures of us at assemblies or meetings, that context. Any memories we talked about was always around the organization. It was kind of icky. I don't know how else to describe it. And they made it clear they didn't want to see me again unless I was coming back. Well, soon after that, I was at the end of my rope. I had enough. I recorded a message. Well, as I was looking down a barrel of a 44, I recorded a message to my folks that I'd see him in hell. I don't know why I didn't pull the trigger. But it wasn't too long after that the ex-fiancée, the one who just broke up with me, she contacted me and told me she knew of an ex-Jehovah's Witness named Don. An ex-Jehovah's Witness? I didn't even know such a thing existed. So I agreed, yeah, I got to talk with this guy. I couldn't believe this. So we met at a Perkins, and he kept giving me the gospel, you know, trust Jesus. And I kept pushing him back, you know, I don't want religion. I just want to be free of my pain. You know, don't give me this religion stuff. He kept persisting. Well, we parted, shaking hands, and, you know, I realize now that I had the tendency of a lot of ex-JWs. I mean, I rejected anything religious or spiritual in nature. I mean, I was the master of my own life, however messed up it was. I was divorced, alone, suicidal, directionless. I was leading myself into misery. By all rights, though, I should have been dead. But God wanted me, and he called me. Months later, I felt compelled to look up Don. I still didn't want religion. I just wanted to talk to him. I didn't have a number for him. I didn't feel like I could call that ex-fiancée up. So I remembered, well, he mentioned Crystal E. Free Church. Sure, I'll go there in my blue jeans. I figured, well, if they don't want me there in my blue jeans, they can kick me out. Well, they didn't. Don wasn't there, but some nice people asked me, you know, could they help me? I said, well, I was looking for Don so-and-so. And And they said, well, he's not here, but if you give us your contact info, we'll let you know you're here. So I did. Well, behind the scenes, they gave that info to an evangelism outreach team, an EO team. And they contacted me and wanted to know if they could talk, get together and just talk. I'm sure I was desperate and lonely, I'd do anything. So they came over, and they came over week after week. We'd visit, I'd entertain them with coffee and music, and we got to know each other, and they were really nice. I liked that. They kept pressuring me, or presenting, not pressuring, but presenting the gospel to me in every which way you can think of. But I was a tough nut to crack. I was stubborn like my dad, and I was stubborn to commit. But then after the 5th visit from the EO team, I became curious and bought a Bible from B. Dalton's, of all places. Before I opened it, I remember challenging God, if you're real, let me know. So I decided to read part of the Bible. Did I start with the Gospel of John? No. Did I start with Matthew? No. I started with the Revelation. As an ex-Jehovah's Witness, anybody, Cindy would appreciate that. I read that, and it was not what I was taught when I was a youth. It did not jive. I realized that the truth that I was taught was a lie. The society lied to me. Well, then I read the Gospel of John. The words, God himself, they just jumped off the page. It made sense like never before. They were written for me. God was real, and he reached out, and I finally listened. That I was a sinner was never in question. And then he paid for my sins was really good news to me, and I needed him. I didn't have to be perfect to be accepted, and I really like that too. So, on March 11th, 1993, alone in my apartment, I accepted Christ, and he accepted me. I was redeemed. Praise the Lord. Well, the next week, on their 6th visit, I told the EO team that I accepted Christ. I'm not sure who was happier, me or them. I mean, they shared that they'd been praying for me and were asking God if this should be their last visit, if they saw no progress. They felt that they might have been throwing pearls to swine, au contraire. Well, soon after that, they introduced me to someone who had mentored me for quite a while. His name was Mike. I remember him from my gaming days years before. Coincidence? I don't think so. Well, then he introduced me to Dave. Now, Dave worked at the Billy Graham Association, the phone center that used to be located here. Now, Dave was another ex-JW, one that I actually met in the early 70s. And he told me that the way he got out of the Jehovah's Witnesses was reading Ephesians 2:8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. And he told me, he kind of thinking about that, and he goes, well, if it's free, why am I working so hard for it? That convinced him. Well, meeting him, was that another coincidence? I don't think so. It's funny, though, I went there, the Billy Graham Association, just to see Dave, but God had other plans. See, I started volunteering during the Crusades and answer phones. I would always end the phone call, whoever was talking to me, saying, I'll see you in heaven. I mean, it's funny, I grew up not even believing I would go there, but now I am. One call I will never forget. The phone call, I consider a confirmation of God's acceptance of me. See, the caller was a man like myself. His life mirrored mine. He had a failed marriage. He was a single dad. He was lonely, depressed. I mean, everything that I had been. Was that a coincidence? I don't think it was. You see, I asked the caller if he had a Bible. He said yes. So I asked him to turn to a specific verse. I can't remember what that was. But when he did, when he opened his Bible to that verse, a copy of the Footprints poem fell out. And he started crying because he knew that was meant for him. And I cried because I knew God was right there. Well, soon after that, I got involved with Answers Inc. from Bruce Lawton, who you'll hear from later. And I joined them in a peaceful demonstration at a Jehovah's Witness district assembly in Rochester. At one point, I was sharing the gospel with a young man. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that I remember when I was a kid. We must have been talking 5-10 minutes, and then I heard a voice, a woman's voice behind me asking, "Where have you been? I've been looking all over for you." So I turned to look, to put a face to that voice, and no more than 20 feet away, I see walking by are my dad, my mom, my 2 sisters, and here I am, holding that Jesus loves you sign. I didn't know what to do. I just said, "Hi, Dad!" He did one of these. He just, one of these shakes. At that point I knew, I think he knew, or he would label me as probably the worst apostate he ever met. Well, my zeal for truth led me to a prophecy conference. Go figure. And that's where I would meet my future wife, Sue, back there. And then my search for healing had me go through a Neil Anderson's Freedom in Christ session. The depths of my prior deception was made quite real to me when I renounced any demons of deception that used me to deceive others when I was a JW. And I was thinking of that teenager that I studied this book with. I instantly felt a pulling up, a tearing out, an almost physical presence being ripped out from deep within. God removed that evil. He removed that deception. Well, over the years since, I've struggled with belief and skepticism and truth and acceptance. And at the same time, I've continued to face the reality of being shunned, as I've only seen my family about a half dozen times the last 40 years, almost all at funerals. Fortunately, I was able to have a relationship with my brother, albeit it was on and off, for about the last 20 years of his life. He left the organization and wandered a lot like I did. He experienced a lot of the same issues. He passed away a few years ago, and his funeral was the last time I saw my family. But God is relentless. He keeps working on me. I mean, it's been a continual process. The pain of rejection has given way to accepting God's love. And the anger and bitterness over all the JW stuff and my family's rejection has waned. A measure of love and understanding and concern has taken its place. I think I've become more like a trusting child who looks to Jesus with confidence. I don't know all the answers, I don't have them all, but I know the one who does. And it's taken a long time for me to get there, but that's okay. And as I reflect back on what I've gone through, I'm reminded of God's redeeming love for me. When I lived the lie of the JWs, God didn't give up on me. He orchestrated my exit out of the organization. And when I lived the lie of my own self-deception, I cursed him for so many years. God didn't give up on me. I mean, he never did, even when I had. God kept me from ending my life and spending eternity separated from him. I was a sinner to the nth degree, and I'm eternally grateful God is a God of endless second chances. So when he sent Don and later that EO team to present his gospel, I accepted him, and I finally had the life I wanted. I'm reminded of the Footprints poem that the crusade caller had, and to paraphrase a section, I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord, reflecting on scenes of my life. I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to me, and the other to the Lord. But then I noticed that during the most troublesome times of my life, there's only 1 set of footprints, and I questioned why. The Lord said, "My precious child, I love you, and I will never, never leave you during your times of trial and suffering." You see, when you saw only 1 set of footprints, it was then that I carried you.